We got lots of requests after our heavy bag video to do a video as a guide to shadowboxing. You folks were heard, and today I'm going to talk about my philosophy and some common pitfalls on shadowboxing so that you can have success when you fight. Shadowboxing requires no equipment and very little space. Even a 5 foot by 5 foot square like we have today will do. It's simply you practicing your boxing techniques and tactics in the open air, and because of its flexibility, it will make up a majority of your solo training. Superficially, shadowboxing will increase your sport-specific cardio and endurance, as well as your hand speed and foot speed. But this pales in comparison to the less tangible attributes that are strengthened, that are improved by shadowboxing, such as your balance, proprioception, your movement efficiency and muscle memory, your timing and rhythm, and your ability to focus and be mindful of what you're doing while you box. When partnerless, it is also the optimal tool to practice your attacks and defense on the move, as well as your transitions between attacking and defending and vice versa. When I'm coaching an athlete and watching them shadowbox, I want them to use this as an opportunity to demonstrate their handle, their understanding of the system of boxing. I want to see them spend time at all three ranges. I want to see them spend time pressuring and on the back foot. I want to see them using the appropriate guard for the appropriate distance. I want all of their exchanges to have entries, a delivery of force, and exits. And this is a really intimidating thing for a coach to ask. But here's the long and short of it. Your greatest tool when shadowboxing is your imagination. Your ability to draw on your sparring and fight experience in combination with your imagination is going to make me believe that there is a dangerous, respectable opponent in front of you. If you're truly imagining fighting somebody, all of these things will come together and your understanding of the system of boxing will reveal itself. How will they respond when you attack? How will they respond when you defend? How will they respond when you move to one side or the other side? You can either imagine an individual that you're sparring against, or you can create a Frankenstein's monster of all sorts of different teammates, former opponents, professionals that you've seen to give you different looks and guide your behavior through your shadowboxing. I know that when I was a kid, I used to imagine fighting the kids who bullied me at school.
And here it goes, I'm just a kid.
As I got older, now I imagine fighting legendary fighters like George Foreman, Bernard Hopkins, and James Toney. But your imagination is the only limiting factor. If you struggle with your imagination and are a more systems-based athlete, then ask yourself a couple questions when you're shadowboxing. Are you the tall fighter or the small fighter? Are you pressuring or being pressured? What of the three archetypes of boxing are you embodying? Are you the pressure fighter? Are you the out fighter? Are you the puncher? Is your opponent a pressure fighter, an out fighter, or a puncher? And what of the three distances are you fighting in? Are you fighting on the outside, the middle distance, or the inside? This matrix of variables all creates different tactics and strategies depending on how they interact, and should give you something to be mindful, focused on, and thoughtful about when you're doing your training. So let's talk about some common mistakes and pitfalls when you're shadowboxing. Not extending your punches all the way or just throwing arm punches. You want to make sure that when you're shadowboxing, you're throwing full extension, full range of motion, hard punches with hip and leg. This is important not only for muscle memory, but also to condition your joints and tendons and muscles to miss punches even when throwing at max effort. A lot of people have a bad habit of looking down, staring straight at the floor when they're shadowboxing. You should be looking at or just under what you're hitting. Chin down, eyes up. As a lot of people shadowbox, no matter what punches they're selecting, even if they're selecting inside or middle distance punches like hooks and uppercuts, they have a tendency to just kind of hold this relaxed out guard. It's really important that you select the appropriate guard for the appropriate distance. Speaking of the inside, make sure not to forget about it. It's really, really important that you get your repetitions in, practicing your techniques and strategies at this distance as well. A lot of folks get stuck on full offense when they're doing their shadowboxing because they don't have somebody to react to or keep them accountable and attack back at them. So they're over their front foot and they're throwing hard punches the whole time instead of balancing that out. Which leads to a second phenomenon that I call the Roomba situation. The Roomba situation is where somebody just mills around as if they're chasing a heavy bag on a Roomba. You want to avoid this at all costs, as this is not accurate boxing. Punch selection is not a choice. It is a reflection of your position to your target. For example, you can't keep your feet planted and throw a 1-1-6-1-1. There's too much of a disparity between the distances on those punches. But if you move your feet appropriately, you're welcome to use those jabs to move in, deliver the 6, and then use those jabs as an exit. Speaking of exiting, it's very, very important that you make sure that you are finishing on defense or finishing with an exit strategy. You would be lucky to knock somebody out in an evenly matched fight, and you want to make sure that you are planning for the worst, even if you're training and hoping for the best. The final pitfall that I want to address is slow defense. So a lot of people throw their offense 1, 2, 3, and then they go slip, slip, roll. It's very, very important that you have some urgency and some conviction to your defense. If you go 1, 2, 3, then you need to go slip, slip, roll. You want to anticipate an opponent punching at you as quickly as you're punching at them, and you need to defend accordingly. When my athletes are struggling with their shadowboxing, I find that these 3 tips give them more guidance and help than anything else. First tip, slow down. I think a lot of athletes get the wrong idea when I say that shadowboxing should mimic a fight, and they think that I mean pace and power. While you certainly can go fight pace and full power, what I care about as a coach is context. I care that the appropriate techniques and tactics are slotted in at the appropriate times for you to keep yourself safe while wielding the sweet science. It's a great strength of shadowboxing to be able to slow down or stop during a sequence and practice it until it's perfect, or to repeat a complex situation until you've got a handle on it and can do it at a nearer to fight pace speed. My second tip for my athletes who struggle with their shadowboxing is to watch a fight while you do it. Not only does it act as a round timer for you, but it also can jumpstart your imagination and give you some points to anchor to guide you through your shadowboxing. While watching the fight, you can imagine you're fighting one of the boxers. You could imagine you are one of the boxers. You could try to replicate different techniques that you see, or you can just generally be inspired by the vibe of the fight. Additionally, this is a wonderful way to stay focused and mindful and thoughtful whilst doing your tape study. My third tip is for my athletes who find themselves struggling with replicating a fight. That's a big mental burden for them. They might experience paralysis by analysis. I want you to remember that instead of overthinking, let yourself lean into the versatility of shadowboxing. Know that you can use it to replicate a fight, but you can also use shadowboxing to practice rhythm, timing, flow, efficiency of movement, and muscle memory. And you can accomplish this by shadowboxing along to music. Find yourself some funky beats. I love Motown, I love disco, I love East Coast rap, all right? Find yourself some funky beats and just shadowbox along. Focus on the pace, focus on the rhythm, focus on finding patterns in the music that you can replicate and keep up with, and just bop along. This is not a consolation prize. This is just another way to use the tool, and is one of my personal favorite boxing drills. Here we have some examples of professional fighters shadowboxing contrasted to some actual moments from their fights, where you can see that when they're shadowboxing, they're practicing the move sets in the context that they would pull the trigger on them when it comes time to compete. You can see Rigo shadowboxing here, and he is focusing on moving in into his closed side and attacking with that left hand, and you can see him do the same thing when he fights. We have Andre Ward being extremely mindful with his shadowboxing, the way that he moves laterally, keeps his base under him, feints to set up his jabs, and you can see him doing the same thing against Carl Froch when they fought in the finals of the Super 6 tournament. If you're nervous that your shadowboxing looks kind of goofy or herky-jerky, or you're self-conscious about somebody watching you, look at this shadowboxing footage of all-time middleweight great Harry Greb shadowboxing. You can see that it's not just about practicing perfect techniques, it's about warming up the muscles, playing with rhythm, and sometimes even exaggerating movements to help hone in on what makes them great. And remember, Harry Greb had a win all the way up at heavyweight against Gene Tunney, and here we have footage of Gene Tunney looking spectacular, beating the brakes off of Jack Dempsey in the famous long count fight. Another example I wanted to make sure to show in this video is some shadow wrestling. So in amateur wrestling, you can see that the wrestlers practice shadow wrestling just like boxers practice their shadow boxing. And you don't hear them complaining that, oh, I struggle to imagine I'm actually holding somebody's head, pushing somebody's shoulder, pulling somebody's arm, or pummeling for position. That's their entire sport. If they can find a way to do this with the air and without a partner, then you have no excuse not to practice shadowboxing on the inside. Famously, the Cuban amateur development program shadowboxes a round for every other round of training they do. So if they do 10 rounds of sparring, 20 rounds of bag work, and 10 rounds of mitt work, they will additionally do 40 rounds of shadowboxing. This helps to balance out any of the training scars that they accrue through these other methods, and is likely what gives them the reputation for having such slick head movement and footwork. As a bonus point today, I'm going to talk about weighted shadowboxing. There is a huge split in the boxing community, both athletes and coaches, about how they feel about shadowboxing with dumbbells. Some coaches think that it increases hand speed, and other coaches think that it trains bad mechanics and it increases the risk of injury. And in reality, they're both kind of right. Let's talk about what you need to do to weighted shadowbox correctly and reap its benefits. To be done correctly, you should be using 1 to 3 pound dumbbells for your weighted shadowboxing. You don't want to use a dumbbell that's so heavy you can't reach max acceleration by the end of that punch. You also want to make sure that whatever weight you're using, you can control. The same way that when I throw a punch, I brace at the end of that movement, I want to imagine grabbing onto that dumbbell. I don't want my arm to be completely relaxed, or I'm going to risk hyperextending my elbow or hurting my shoulder. My real focus here should be on accelerating at the start of this movement. It's about moving that inertia, about picking up speed at the beginning of this range of motion and controlling it at the end of this range of motion. I should never be shadowboxing slow. This isn't just about conditioning my shoulders, and I should never be going either slow enough or using a weight that is so heavy that I feel like I have to hold it up at the end of my punch. If I feel like I'm holding this weight up at the end of my punch as gravity pulls it down, instead of accelerating it forward, then this is gonna hurt my punch mechanics, because it's going to encourage me to engage my neck and my traps and lift up instead of accelerating through and to what I'm hitting. If you look at punching as a movement on the force-velocity curve, you'll recognize that it is a speed-strength movement, which is why weighted shadowboxing can be valuable. It's not a pure speed movement because there is resistance from the weight of the wraps and the gloves, but it's speed strength because by the time I reach the end of the range of motion on that punch, I will have fully overcome the resistance of the glove, wrap, or dumbbell. If you follow these rules, you will increase motor neuron recruitment, which means an increase in speed and power, while minimizing your risk of injury and risk of damaging your technique. The value of shadowboxing cannot be overstated, and making it a core of your training is going to help prepare you for any opponent you might encounter when you fight.
Hold on. Stop wrestling.
Did you hear it in the thing?